When was the last time you asked anyone, hey, want to play some Gambit? Yeah, that's what I thought. Gambit is a game mode with so much potential, but it has simply been left to rot. How can you call something a core playlist when it hasn't received a single new map since March of 2019? What Bungie once touted as a mode that takes advantage of all the best aspects of Destiny has instead become a Frankenstein's monster of all the worst parts of PvP and many of the more frustrating aspects of PvE. From getting obliterated by xenophage from across the map, to playing an entire game and not having a single heavy ammo brick, to moats that fall through the floor and just won't let you pick them up. The experience of playing Gambit more often than not becomes an incredibly frustrating ordeal, and the hits don't stop coming with the abysmal gameplay experience. Oh no. The loot structure for Gambit is also completely atrocious, with just 3 unique guns added to the playlist since the ritual weapon Python was created for Gambit all the way back in December of 2019. Not to mention the fact that the new armor added to Gambit and Beyond Light is functionally identical to the new armor sets added to Crucible and Strikes at the same time. And to top it all off, Gambit is the only core mode without an endgame activity. The Vanguard has Nightfalls and dungeons and raids. The Crucible has Trials of Osiris and Iron Banner. But what does Gambit have? Nothing. The closest semblance to endgame Gambit that we had was Gambit Prime, which has since been removed, and it was a mode even more half-baked than Trials, with extremely broken armor sets and snowballing so hard you'd think you were the Huns and Mulan. But despite all of this, I believe that Gambit can still be saved. At its core, Gambit really does combine many of Destiny's best attributes into a single activity, with all the satisfaction of popping alien heads with your buddies, to feeling the true power fantasy of nuking a giant boss, with hero moments coming with clutch invasions that evoke the feelings of winning a 1v3 in Trials. In this video, I'm going to explain how I would overhaul Gambit. We're going to discuss how the loot structure can be modernized to properly reward time invested, and we will then discuss how we can revamp the gameplay and make the mode both more fun to play as well as feel far more fair. And finally, we'll also lay the foundation for what a true endgame experience in Gambit could be. Let's jump in. So, let's jump right into how we can improve the loot structure of Gambit and ensure that the player's time invested is respected. Right now, your primary rewards from Gambit are post-game drops and engrams earned at the Drifter from ranking up your infamy. Unfortunately, the vast majority of your post-game drops are trash blues, with the occasional World Loot Pool Legendary, and then rarely one of the Gambit playlist weapons, aka Crowd Pleaser, Bottom Dollar, and Trinary System. As for your Infamy rank up engrams, these don't even contain the Gambit playlist weapons, instead granting only World Loot Pool guns and low stat Calamity rig armor, and upon resetting your Infamy, you are granted 1 Ascendant Shard for your first reset of the season, and then just an exotic engram on subsequent resets. What this all amounts to is a playlist that grants you mountains of trash blues, a chunk of World Loot Pool weapons, a lot of low stat Gambit armor, a single Pity Shard a season, and then once in a blue moon, the thing that you are actually playing for, a Gambit playlist weapon. And to add insult to injury, not only can you grind out an entire Infamy reset and not see a single playlist weapon like Bottom Dollar, but when you do eventually get one to drop, it has 12 perk options in each of the final 2 slots, making your odds of snagging a 5 out of 5 God roll an incredibly low 9,072 to 1. Grinding for incredibly rare weapon rolls like this was okay in past eras of Destiny, when the looming threat of sunsetting wasn't on the horizon. Now though, we need to make loot drops both more frequent and also more deterministic. so you can reasonably grind out these playlist weapons and enjoy them before sunsetting takes them away. Now, first things first, we need to dramatically increase the drop rate of the Gambit playlist weapons at the end of matches. I would model the drop rate for Gambit playlist weapons in a similar fashion to the old Tier 2 Reckoning system, aka you have a chance to receive a Gambit weapon after every game, with your drop chance increasing until it becomes a guaranteed drop on your 4th game in a row of not receiving a Gambit weapon. This would not only drastically increase the amount of weapon drops the player would earn from just playing the mode, but it means that each game matters and your time is respected, as each game without a drop means you are one game closer to getting a drop. Now, the next thing that Gambit needs on the loot front is to continue adding 2 new playlist weapons each season. We've seen what a difference just a single weapon like Bottom Dollar has made. Now imagine a weapon or 2 like this added each season to Gambit and the other core playlists. Destiny players crave loot above all else, and Bungie needs to continue to sate that hunger, especially in a world with sunsetting. Now, let's dive into how we can revamp the loot for ranking up your infamy. Considering how popular the focusing system has been in both Season of Arrivals and again in Season of the Chosen, it's time for the core playlist vendors to adopt this functionality. For this system to work, we would need to add 2 new items to the game: Gambit engrams and Gambit medallions. In this new system, each time you rank up your infamy, you would earn a Gambit engram, and this would include all infamy ranks and sub-ranks, instead of earning a legendary engram that grants either a world loot pool weapon or low stat calamity rig armor. In addition to the Gambit engram, each infamy rank up would also grant a Gambit medallion. Gambit medallions would be used as the focusing currency for the Gambit engrams, in a similar fashion to Altered Element from Season of Arrivals and the hammer charges in Season of the Chosen. This would mean that you would earn 15 Gambit engrams and 15 Gambit medallions over the course of a full Infamy reset. The only restriction I would place on these 2 new currencies is that your Gambit engrams and medallions would all expire at the end of each season. This way, you can't just hoard them in the back half of a season and immediately get the new Gambit weapons at the start of a new season. So, let me walk you through how this all would work. By default, all players would have the ability to focus a Gambit engram into a world loot pool weapon or a world loot pool armor piece, with neither option requiring a Gambit medallion. In addition, players would be able to focus a Gambit engram into a random weapon or armor piece from the Gambit playlist, again, without requiring a Gambit medallion. Players would then have the ability to focus a Gambit engram into a Gambit playlist weapon for a single medallion, or into a Gambit playlist armor piece for 1 medallion. The second row of focusing options would allow the player to target farm a weapon from a subset of the world loot pool. Strikes and the Crucible could incorporate a similar system, with each core playlist having a third of the world loot pool available to be target farmed by participating in that mode. For example, by playing Gambit, you could target farm weapons like Night Watch, Cold Denial, or Tarantula. To focus a Gambit engram into a specific world loot pool weapon, the cost would be higher than focusing into a random Gambit weapon, and as such, I think that 2 medallions would be an appropriate price. Now, the third row of focusing options would allow the player to target farm a weapon or a high stat armor piece from the Gambit playlist. This would include weapons like Crowd Pleaser, Bottom Dollar, and Trinary System, and would also include weapons from future releases, so that by Season 15, there would be 7 Gambit weapons to farm at any given time. To focus a Gambit engram into a specific Gambit playlist weapon, the cost would rise even further, requiring 3 medallions. This would mean that you would be able to guarantee yourself 5 Gambit playlist weapon drops of your choosing each full Infamy reset. And don't forget, while you're going through an Infamy reset, you would be getting random weapon drops at a minimum of every 4 games with the changes we talked about earlier. With how many perk options are on these playlist guns, we need to make loot rain for players to have a chance at getting the role they want. And finally, players would have the ability to focus a Gambit engram into a specific Gambit playlist armor piece. This focused armor piece would come with high stats, guaranteeing a base stat total of 58 or higher, with 2 stats at plus 16 or higher, similar to the armor that drops from the final boss chest of the Pit of Heresy dungeon. The cost for this focusing option would climb even higher, up to 5 medallions. This would mean that you would be able to guarantee yourself 3 high stat, spiky distribution armor pieces in the slot of your choosing each Infamy Reset. Now, before we finish up with the loot overhaul, there is one final quality of life update that I would make not just to Gambit, but also to the Crucible. When you reset your Infamy or your Valor, you would always receive both an Ascendant Shard and an exotic engram. Only receiving a single Ascendant Shard per season from Gambit and from the Crucible is laughably stingy in a world with armor sunsetting. Bungie, throw the casual player a bone, okay? And with all of these changes to the loot structure, I think that Gambit would be an incredibly rewarding activity to participate in, and one that values your time. Now, we need to make the mode itself more fun to play. Now that we've made Gambit an incredibly rewarding activity with a loot grind that respects your time, we need to revamp the gameplay itself to make the mode more fun as well as more fair. In my opinion, on a fundamental level, I do feel that Gambit is a pretty well thought out and designed game mode, but there are a handful of outlying factors that completely ruin it. Specifically, there are 5 key factors that make Gambit an unpleasant experience: 4 stacking, heavy ammo, invasions, snowballing, and boss baking. So let's first talk about 4 stacking. While there's nothing wrong with teaming up with your buddies to grind out some sweet Gambit loot, Gambit as a game mode involves a lot more strategy than other parts of Destiny, like getting everyone to bank on time, who gets the heavy ammo from the wall, who's gonna invade, calling out where the enemy invader is, and so on. There are advantages due solely to being on comms to a degree in Gambit not seen anywhere else in the game, and this can make the solo experience an absolute dumpster fire. Because this isn't something like Trials or the competitive playlist, but rather a more casual experience, I 100% believe that we need to incorporate freelance Gambit, similar to the freelance options available for the survival playlist and for Iron Banner. That way, if you're a solo player, you can queue into Gambit without having to worry about coordinated 4 stacks ruining your experience. Now, the next gameplay issue that we need to tackle is by far the biggest problem with Gambit ever since its inception: heavy ammo. The issues with heavy ammo are multi-layered, as heavy ammo often swings the balance of power to invaders during those phases of a match, and the randomness of how much heavy a player and team gets over the course of a match often determines who can nuke their primeval more effectively and ultimately win the game. Simply put, heavy ammo needs a big redesign for Gambit, and I think that there is actually a pretty elegant solution to the heavy ammo problem, one that both reduces the potency of invaders while at the same time completely eliminating the RNG nature of acquiring heavy ammo. The change that we need to make is that all players start each game with a fixed amount of heavy ammo. There would be no more heavy ammo bricks to collect off the wall, no more heavy ammo drops from PvE enemies, and all the other methods of acquiring heavy ammo, like the newly reworked Aeon Cult gauntlets, just wouldn't work in Gambit. And the best part of all with this change, it makes the game mode's name, Gambit, more relevant than ever. The definition of Gambit reads as follows, quote, "A smart action in a game or other situation that is intended to achieve an advantage and usually involves taking a risk." So, with everyone starting off with a fixed amount of heavy ammo in a match, the player has to decide both when to use their limited heavy ammo reserves and also how much to use in any given scenario. For example, if you're the invader for your team, when you head through the portal to battle the other team, you have a Gambit to make. On the one hand, do I completely unload nearly all my heavy ammo to ensure that I get the team wipe? By doing this, I'd secure my team an early lead, but now I'm out of heavy ammo for later invasions and my DPS on the primeval is going to be shit. Or, on the other hand, do I conserve my heavy ammo and instead rely on my special and primary weapons to get the job done and be able to help my team better nuke the final boss later? But in doing this, you'd be taking a huge risk, as the other team would now have a better chance of killing you and shutting down your invasion, which could ultimately swing the match in their favor. This change to heavy ammo would also mean that players would be far less helpless when they get invaded, as they would have a similar gambit presented to them, a la, do I use my heavy ammo to take out the invader, or do I save it for later? And to make the heavy ammo situation even more fair, Bungie could individually tune both heavy weapon archetypes and specific exotics to have varying levels of starting heavy ammo. We all know just how crazy powerful a weapon like Xenophage is in Gambit. It's pretty much the ultimate invasion weapon, and yet is still a DPS monster when it's time to nuke the primeval. By tuning how much heavy ammo the specific exotics and archetypes get at the start of a match, Bungie has a way to balance heavy weapons for the Gambit experience alone, and leave weapons alone balance-wise for the rest of the game. This way, we wouldn't see iconic, fan-favorite weapons like Sleeper Simulant get nerfed into oblivion because of their prowess in Gambit. Seriously, I miss you, Sleeper. Come back to us. Now that we've addressed the heavy ammo problem, let's tackle the next big Gambit issue: invasions. Right now, invaders completely own these phases of the game, often being the only player on the field with heavy ammo and possessing completely ridiculous wall hacks that turn invasions in their favor. But we can easily fix this. With the changes we just talked about to the heavy ammo economy, every player in the game is now guaranteed to have some amount of heavy ammo, which means that fighting off invaders just got a lot easier and more consistent. As for the wall hack issue, there is honestly another elegant solution we can employ here that will make the invasion phase more fair for the defending team, but still give the invader enough tools to be on an even footing in a 1v4. What I'm proposing is that the invader has their current wall hack ability for only the first 5 seconds of the invasion, so that they can quickly get a sense for where the entire enemy team is located. But after that, the invader would only have full strength wall hacks every 5 seconds, with this wall hack burst lasting for a second each time. Think of it like sonar. I would also make it so that when the 1 second wall hack bursts happen, not only does the invader get this wall hack ping, but so would the members of the defending team. This would eliminate the frustrating experience of having no clue where a cheeky invader's camped out with a xenophage. So, to compensate for the removal of always-on wall hacks, I would give the invader enhanced radar similar to what is granted to top train Night Stalkers with the perk Keen Scout, but I would juice it up. This new invasion radar would have infinite range, and as such, the invader would still be able to tell what sector of the map the enemy players are at. I feel this would be a much more balanced version of invasions, as the invader would only have full strength wall hacks for short bursts of the phase, but with an enhanced enough radar to reasonably find guardians when they don't. And with invasions addressed, we've got two big problems left with the gameplay: snowballing and boss bakes. Let's talk about snowballing first. Right now, Gambit really is a game mode of who can invade first. If your team invades first and gets a full team wipe, the enemy team's progress is basically set to 0, and by the time that your invader comes back, your team almost certainly has had enough time to collect enough motes uncontested to send your invader right back. Especially with coordinated teams, the game's basically over at this point, as the team that invaded first is going to get to the primeval incredibly fast, while the other team has probably less than 25 motes banked. However, with the changes we discussed earlier, the balance of power during invasions would no longer be tipped completely in the invading team's favor, making the snowballing scenario far less common, but it would still happen. What I recommend is that once a team has summoned their primeval, the opposing team gets 2x progress on banking motes, aka each mote is counting for 2. So say you need 40 motes to get to your primeval. If you and a teammate each banked 10 motes, it would count as 40 and you'd summon your own primeval. This would allow teams the ability to make a comeback in a non-RNG form. The other change I'd make to combat snowballing would be that if your team summons the primeval first, but still has any invasions available, these would be wiped away. There's nothing more tilting than being down big in a Gambit match, seeing the other team summon a primeval, and then getting invaded again. And finally, we've arrived at the last contentious issue plaguing Gambit: easy boss bakes. Right now, it's incredibly easy for a coordinated team to nuke their primeval, even without any stacks of primeval slayer. It's so ridiculous that you can get invaded, have your whole team die, and then still nuke the primeval before the invader is allowed to come back. Not to mention the fact that the longer a primeval fight goes, the more stacks of Primeval Slayer you're gonna get, meaning that 9 times out of 10, the team that simply summons first will win. What I'd recommend for the boss phase is that while any Primeval Envoys are alive, the player would have a debuff called Shroud of Darkness. This debuff would dramatically reduce your damage against the Primeval on the order of 50 to 75%. Then, the first time the boss reaches 2/3 health, 2 new envoys would spawn, and instead of being wimpy wizards, it would be 2 tanky Taken Knights. Then, the first time the boss reaches 1/3 health, 2 final envoys would spawn, this time being 2 thick boy Taken Ogres. This would put the boss phase of Gambit somewhere in between OG Gambit and Gambit Prime, as on the one hand, you could still burn the boss with no forced time phases, but on the other hand, you'd really want to kill those Primeval Envoys just like in Gambit Prime. So, I would then add one final wrinkle to the boss phase that would give a team that is behind a true chance to come back. That is, when an invader is present, all defending players would receive the Shroud of Darkness debuff. This would mean that a good invader could not only heal the enemy primeval, but also stall out the team in the lead, cutting their DPS. These changes to the envoys in the invasion phase during the boss battle would lead to a more back and forth seesaw type of gameplay, and less about a laughably easy boss bake. And with all of these changes to make the gameplay experience more fun, it's time to turn our eyes to what endgame Gambit could be. Now that we've addressed the loot structure and the core gameplay experience for Gambit, we can begin to lay the foundation for what endgame Gambit could be. Now, I feel like this could be a fully fleshed out topic for a separate future video, so I'm only going to explain the high-level premises of my ideas for endgame Gambit here. Let me know down in the comments if you'd like to see this future video. Anyway, back to the point. First off, I think that endgame Gambit, which from here on out I'll be referring to as Gambit Perfected, should follow the Iron Banner model. That is, a once-a-month special event that lasts for an entire week. While Gambit Perfected is live, Triple Infamy would be active, similar to how Triple Valor is active during Iron Banner. Gambit Perfected would also have matchmaking in the form of both a general playlist and a freelance playlist. Now, let's distinguish Gambit Perfected from normal Gambit, and to do so, I'd implement a couple of twists. The first twist would be the reintroduction of Gambit rolls, which was first seen in Gambit Prime with the armor set bonuses granted by the roll armor. However, that implementation of Gambit rolls was fatally flawed for 2 reasons. 1, the set bonuses themselves were either too weak, collector, or too strong, invader. And 2, you had to play a completely separate activity to get an armor set with the Gambit roll perks, meaning most people just didn't engage with it. Instead, I would reintroduce these Gambit rolls in a much more streamlined and fair way. First off, we'd need to slightly buff up some of the weaker rolls like Collector and Sentry, and then nerf the power of Invader, specifically the extra health and the locking down of the bank. And then, instead of needing an armor set to play these Gambit rolls, I would introduce role queue matchmaking. This premise is used widely in other role-based games, such as Overwatch. For Gambit Perfected, this would mean if you want to be the invader, you would enter the invader queue, and once you're in-game, you would glow red to indicate to the other players what your role is, and you would have all the invader perks active and displayed in your character menu. And for invaders, you'd be the only one who could go through the portal, for example. That way blueberries don't ruin the experience. The second big twist I would implement with Gambit Perfected is spicing up blockers and primeval envoys. I think that you could either change out certain blockers or envoys to make them tougher, say taking Minotaur instead of a Phalanx for the medium blocker, or you could make all blockers and envoys into champions. This would introduce a new dynamic to Gambit Perfected and make blockers and envoys a true threat during the match. And finally, we would need to give Gambit Perfected some in-game caliber loot. I'm going to be making a video about revamping Iron Banner next week, and the loot structure for that updated Iron Banner would be mimicked here. So I'll wait to go into detail about that system next week. What I will mention though, is what I think would be a slam dunk decision for Bungie to use as the rewards for Gambit Perfected: the old Trials of the Nine weaponry with random rolls. And since this would be considered an endgame activity, I would also incorporate the changes to weapons I talked about in my Weapons 2.0 video, with base Gambit Perfected weapons becoming pinnacle weapons, which would mean they would have the following attributes. They would have the ability to reroll the masterwork. They would have the ability to change the element of the weapon. They would also have 2 choices in each of the final 2 trait slots. They would also have the ability to re-roll one of the perk nodes on the gun, and finally, they would come with an additional intrinsic perk that is relevant to the activity in which the weapon was acquired. And just like that, we've come to the end of another video. Hopefully you guys all enjoyed this latest installment and how we can continue to evolve Destiny 2. I still remember when Gambit first debuted back at E3 and GuardianCon 2018, and the community immediately fell in love with the mode. But that honeymoon period didn't last, with one issue or another plaguing the mode to this very day. But with all the changes that we talked about in this video, from making the playlist incredibly rewarding, to changing the gameplay experience itself to be more fun and more strategic, and finally, laying the groundwork for a true endgame version of Gambit to emerge, I think that there is still a bright future ahead for Gambit. As I mentioned earlier, next week's video is going to be all about modernizing Iron Banner, making us all anticipate each and every visit from the Salad Man himself. I say it each week, but the support for these videos has been absolutely mind-blowing. Thank you all so much for inspiring me to produce the absolute best content that I possibly can. And as always, if you want to support this channel, make sure to leave a comment down below, drop a like, and smash that sub button. Have a fantastic week, guys, and I hope to catch you all in the next one. This has been your host, QJ. Cheers.